In this program, you'll witness the largest non-political gathering concerning the unity of Jerusalem in modern history. In what the organizers call the largest ever demonstration for Jerusalem, more than 250,000 people massed to the streets around the walls of the old city, and with torches blazing and the words, "Jerusalem, I pledge," projected onto the wall near the Jaffa Gate, the crowd sang in unison, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its cunning." Join us as we introduce you to Mr. Ehud Olmert, the mayor of Jerusalem, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, the former Prime Minister of Israel, and Mr. Willem Glasauer, who represented Christians for Israel and hundreds of thousands of Christian supporters from around the world for a united Jerusalem.
I think if after the rally there's a sense that the Jewish people have spoken, that Jerusalem is not a city to be divided, we'll have succeeded. And I think from the looks of attendance at least, we're going to make that statement here tonight. It's very hard to estimate a crowd this size, but we're measuring it in the hundreds of thousands, not in the tens of thousands.
No city in the world has experienced so many religious and political struggles as Jerusalem. No city has been conquered so often, and the inhabitants of no other city have been so often massacred and carried off into captivity. For Jews, Jerusalem is the center of their nation and religion in the land promised them by the God of Israel, their ancient, current, and future home.
Jerusalem is a city built of stone, built of Jerusalem stone. These rough-hewn stones glow golden in the evening sunset. Jerusalem is called a city of gold because of this effect. And then there are the mighty blocks of the western wall that stand as a watchman through the centuries. In the upper portions of the wall, flowers grow, doves coo, and down in the lower levels, the Jewish faithful whisper their secret prayers and put their requests in between the cracks. These stones continually speak of both antiquity, permanence, and promises of the future.
Jerusalem is sacred to three religions: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism.
Islam says that Jerusalem is her third most holy city after Mecca and Medina, but it's curious that Jerusalem is never mentioned in the Quran.
While in Christianity, according to the Gospels, Jerusalem was sanctified in the last days of the life of Jesus by his death and resurrection.
Jerusalem, for the Jew, is the city that transcends government, politics, and even time itself, and connects the mothers and fathers of the past to the children and grandchildren of its future. And Jesus himself said that he would return when the people cried for him to come, when they would say, "Blessed are you who come in the name of the Lord." What time are we living in? Surely Jerusalem is a time clock.
Since the era of King David, control over Jerusalem has changed hands numerous times, and in fact, the holiest city to the Jews has been ruled by many Gentile rulers. Jesus said in the Gospel of Luke, Jerusalem will no longer be trampled down by the Gentiles when the times of the Gentiles are being fulfilled. And in 1967, Jerusalem came back into the hands of the Jewish people for the first time in nearly 2,500 years.
Tonight we are showing that there is national consensus among all the people in Israel. We will see tonight people from the right wing and from the left wing, people from the army, poetry,s writers, people from workers and everywhere, everyone that coming to demonstrate that Jerusalem must be united, and no one, not the President of the United States, not Mr. Arafat, and not our Prime Minister can negotiate about Jerusalem or dividing it. So this night we are giving the message to all the world, to all the European countries, to the United States, to the Arabs, that Jerusalem will be united under Israel authority, legally of Israel.
The One Jerusalem rally was organized in just a few weeks by the efforts of former prisoner of Zion, Natan Sharansky, the mayor of Jerusalem, Ehud Olmert, and was immediately endorsed by Israeli, Christian, and Jewish leaders from around the world.
I stand here today representing millions of Jews throughout the world, from Manhattan to Moscow, from London to Budapest, and we are all with you in support of Jerusalem. We proudly stand together and proclaim on behalf of millions of Jews that we will never forget Jerusalem. It will always remain the eternal, undivided capital of the people of Israel.
Well, first of all, strictly in terms of it as a city, this is not a time to be dividing a city. Walls are coming down, not going up. We have guaranteed freedom of access to all religions in this city. Before 1967, before it returned to our sovereignty, there wasn't freedom of access to all the holy sites. Christian Arabs in this country, within Israel, were not allowed to visit the churches in East Jerusalem. Now, I don't think there's anybody with a democratic conscience that believes that Yasser Arafat, somebody who's been committed to terrorism for 30, 40 years, is going to guarantee freedom of access to all the holy sites in the city. But in addition to that, in addition to the almost technical or logistical aspect of it, we're talking about a city that represents the heart and soul of a nation that kept us united when we were a divided people spread all over the world. So now that we've come home and we've been united here, we're going to divide her? It's counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense. Now, you'll say, well, look, what about peace? Don't you have to make sacrifices for peace? Well, we've been making sacrifices for peace. We've been giving up and giving up and giving up, and what we've gotten in return are bombs on our buses and in our marketplaces. And there's an overwhelming sense right now within the country that it's time to draw the line and say, Adkan, no further. This is it. Jerusalem is a time to say, stop. We're not taking a chance on Jerusalem.
From time immemorial, Jerusalem has been an integral part of biblical Judaism and secular Jewish life. At every wedding, religious or non-religious, a Jewish couple's union is sanctified by remembering the promise from Psalm 137, which says,
If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its usefulness. Let my tongue grow to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember thee, if I do not place Jerusalem higher than my greatest joy.
When the Jewish nation prayed 2,000 years towards this city, when we turned our face towards Jerusalem, when we dreamt of returning to her, when we longed for her, when we wept for her, when we died for her and her name, we thought about only one place, on this mountain, within its gates and soul. There are still to be found remnants of the two temples of ours, of our nation. This mountain, the pinnacle of all mountains, is our future and will never stop being so. We are saying today to all nations, to all countries, to all those who are watching with concern at what is happening here in this nation, we are a nation, ancient of days. All of our lives, Throughout all of our history, we always prayed, dreamt, and longed to make peace. There is no nation that wants peace more than our nation. There is no nation that has given up so much for peace as our nation. But no nation in the world ever has been asked to give up its most precious and historical site in order to appease another nation. We, no matter how much we want peace, and to make a covenant of friendship with our neighbors far and wide, we will never give up our most precious and important site in the Jewish history. This city, according to the psalmist, is a city ancient of days. It was a united city. She is now a united city. And she will always stay a united city.
Concerning Jerusalem's future, the prophet Zechariah warns, "And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples." In fact, the Temple Mount is one of the most volatile pieces of land in the world. The controversy over this area is based on the fact that it has paramount importance to all three monotheistic religions. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad the prophet dreamt he ascended to heaven from the distant place, later assumed to be Jerusalem. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is considered to be one of the three holiest sites in Islam, after El-Kaaba in Mecca and after the Mosque of Muhammad in Medina. The Temple Mount for Jews is of utmost importance, since the two Jewish holy temples stood on this site. The first, Solomon's Temple, was destroyed in 586 BC, and the second, known as Herod's Temple, was destroyed by the Roman conqueror Titus in 70 CE. Both these temples served as a focal point of life in the Holy Land. During the last 2,000 years, many wars have been fought over Jerusalem, known in Hebrew as the City of Peace. Often the Jewish population has been oblivious to impending danger. And as the saying goes, if we do not learn from history, we will then be doomed to repeat it. As we see from history, danger for Jews in the Middle East is nothing new.
El-Hajj Amin el-Husseini, the great Mufti of Jerusalem, calls the Arabs to a holy war against the Jews. His messengers exhort and excite the populace everywhere. Arabs, remember that the Jew is your worst enemy and your ancestors' worst enemy since ancient times.
Throughout the 1930s, terrorism proved to be the modus operandi of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, Yasser Arafat's distant relative. A massacre in Jaffa is the scene here. These are not scattered attempts of momentary agitation, but in the spring of 1936, Arab terrorism is widespread and organized. Then by the 1940s, when this failed to rid the Holy Land of Jews, the Mufti joined Islam to Nazism and Hitler's final solution in order to solve the Jewish question. In reviewing the 13th SS Muslim Division, he states,
"This division will be our example and guiding light in the war against the common enemies of National Socialism and Islam."
Muslims will not compromise on the issues of Jerusalem. As the city's current Mufti, Akrima Saeed Sabri, warns, either Israel will have to surrender its claims to Jerusalem or face further dramatic upsurges in terror or even all-out war. The Mufti describes Jerusalem as illegally occupied by Israel.
If Israel continues to insist on its stance that it won't give up Jerusalem as its eternal capital, this will lead to a serious crisis in the Middle East, and the responsibility for this tension will fall entirely on the shoulders of Israel and its primary ally, the United States. As the leading peace talks broker, the United States is taking the side of Israel. This action will cause problems in the near future. To us as Muslims, the future of Jerusalem is a vital part of our faith. It is a part of our culture and history. Arabs have ruled Jerusalem for 1,500 years, except during the brief periods of the Crusaders and during the Israeli occupation. Jerusalem is the key to peace. If the Palestinians have their full rights and have Jerusalem as their capital, then there will be peace. But on the other hand, if Israel insists on its claim to Jerusalem, then the city will be the key to war.
When you see Jerusalem no longer under the feet or under the control of Gentiles, you'll know the time of the Gentiles is coming to an end. And this happened in 1967. The city of Jerusalem came back into the hands of the Jewish people, really for the first time in 1900 years. The battle is on. Who is going to control this area in the future? The Hamas, the Islamic fundamentalists, believe that they have the right, by holy war, by suicide bombing, in any way at all, to achieve their ends. And they want to impose their way of life on the rest of society here, the Palestinian society, on Israeli society, and indeed around the world. And their way of doing it is called dawah in Arabic, which means a new life. This is important to know that they have a concept of new life. They want a new Arabic Muslim form of government and religious expression. And they want to control all of Israel, and they'll do it any way they can.
A couple of weeks ago, I made an announcement that I will move from my regular office that you are so familiar with because you have visited me many times over there into this area overlooking the Kotel and the Temple Mount in order to emphasize the deep connection that we feel towards these places and in opposition to the intentions made by the Israeli government to withdraw and to transfer the Israeli sovereignty over these places to the Palestinians. But I think it's very important that symbolically everyone will know that the mayor of the city of Jerusalem has his office right here in the heart of the city, really in the most important segment and the most significant part of the city of Jerusalem. This is where God created his first allegiance with the Jewish people, on top here on Mount Moriah. And all the prayers and all the yearnings and all the dreams and all the tears and all the expectations of Jewish history are focused on this place. This is where we have been saying to each other next year in Jerusalem, that's where we meant it to be, right here on the Temple Mount. And no one has the authority, no one has the power to oppose the will of God and to remove us from where we belong, because this is where God wanted us to be. And this is where the Jewish people started their national life, here because of God. And that's where we will return. And where we return, this is where we stay, and no one can remove us.
What's the significance of that night for Jerusalem, you feel?
Great significance, great significance. This was a show of force. And the force was the depth of the belief and the dedication of the people of Israel and the people of Jerusalem to their city, to their history, to their tradition, and to the future. I mean, this was not political. You didn't hear one word of Barak, of Sharon, the name was not mentioned, not pro-government, not against government, it was pro-Jerusalem, pro-United Jerusalem. That was the strength of this evening.
Sometimes people ask me, what can I do for Israel? What's important to do for Israel? And then I say, the most important thing you can do for Israel is pray for Israel. Because when you stand with Israel, you're entering a spiritual battlefield. The powers of darkness hate Israel, as they hate the Christians, being God's people from the Gentile world and the Jews. And he hates us both. So now Israel is back in the land and Jerusalem is their capital. He will try everything to wipe them off the map, to drive them into the sea. And one of the basic anti-forces is Islam.
We never heard from the Arabs a real peace talks. You know what they are talking in the mosques? Jihad, kill all the Jews. This is what they are taking every Friday in all the mosques. You cannot make a peace that they push the Arabs in the mosque, in the newspaper, in the TV, day after day, in schools, that they want to throw us back to the sea.
Whether Labour or Likud, Jews are Jews. They do not have any moderates or advocates of peace. They are all liars.
By the way, Christians for Israel doesn't mean Christians against the Arabs or against the Palestinians. You'd better not believe the media, whether it's CNN or BBC World News or whatever. It's always, almost totally one side of the story.
The media focus on Jerusalem is intense. The city that was once considered the center of the world has always had a strong emotional and spiritual connection to her residents. For Christians, it is the place of the Passion of Christ. For Jews, since the time of King David, it has been their capital and spiritual center. While for Muslims, it is their third most holy site. The issues are very complicated, hearkening back to the sons of Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac. And keeping the peace in Jerusalem is never easy. And today, the future of Jerusalem is often left entirely in the hands of a privileged few politicians who mostly negotiate in secret.
The Oslo Accords were prepared in a clandestine manner and prepared for the Israeli community as a fait accompli, both Oslo I and Oslo II. And no one, not the politicians of Israel, the lawmakers, the jurists, the people who should know, no one really had the opportunity to go over the implications of what's going on. Most of the clauses of the accords are not known to the people, or not even known to the lawmakers. The war for Jerusalem has begun. When Arafat calls for jihad for Jerusalem, the holy war for Jerusalem, when he declares that he will sacrifice all the children, all of his children, to liberate Jerusalem, he means it. Arafat has now whipped up all of the Muslim passion for the liberation of Jerusalem, and the war has begun.
You find a lot of Christian support for not dividing the city of Jerusalem?
I find overwhelming Christian support for not dividing the city. I remember when Arafat came out of Camp David and said he represents not only the 1 billion Muslims of the world, but all the Christians of the world. And many, many Christian friends of mine called and said, I want you to know that he doesn't represent me. I don't want him to take sovereignty over the Christian holy sites. And I think that within and without the community, there's an overwhelming support for our efforts to keep this city a united one rather than a divided one.
Every single appearance of Arafat in front of his people calls for the continuation of war against Israel, Zionism, and the Jewish people. There is no duplicity on the part of Arafat. Arafat has never given a message of peace at any time to his people.
I think that if people did not feel that there was an attempt to cleave the city in two, they weren't here. But I also think that it's a wonderful expression of an ancient attachment. You know, in antiquity, in biblical times, Jews used to come here in droves. They used to march on foot at the time of the great holidays, the great festivals, religious festivals, to Jerusalem. Today, I saw thousands and thousands of Jews marching up the road from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, reaffirming this ancient bond, this ancient oath that we have taken, that we shall never forget Jerusalem. If I forget the old Jerusalem, goes the saying, well, we'll never forget Jerusalem. We'll never, ever divide Jerusalem. Never. Jerusalem is our heart, it's our soul, it's the center of our being. And this is what these thousands of people are telling you. They are representing millions of Jews around the world. By the way, also millions of non-Jews who have the same feeling of sympathy and I would say solidarity with the Jewish people's return to their great city. So I think this is a very simple statement that says Jerusalem is here, united, free, democratic under Israel, and it will remain so. Thank you.
For those who love Jerusalem, the ancient biblical mandate to pray for the peace of Jerusalem has never been more important than today.